This episode contains graphic content that may not be suitable for all ages. Listener discretion is advised. If you or someone you know is struggling or in crisis, help is available. Call or text 988 or chat with someone at 988lifeline.org. Those outside of the US, reach out to someone at your local crisis center or hotline. Please do not suffer in silence. Over the past 3 decades, many questions have been asked about the case typically referred to as the Springfield Three. Many of these questions are asked by those who want to know what went so wrong. Why has this case seemed almost insurmountable to investigators from the very beginning? Some of those that have worked the case, investigators and other police officials, believe that the investigation was botched from the very beginning, with police at the time not really knowing the proper procedures for how to carry out an investigation of this scope. Police Chief Terry Knowles in particular has received a lot of flack from these critics, who believe that he gave away too much information in the earliest days of the case, to the point that it made prosecution of potential suspects almost impossible. Since so many details of the crime scene had been disclosed to the public, it was hard to verify what someone may have gathered from simple news coverage. Knowles was also described by many as a micromanager, who made it hard for his investigators to follow through on certain leads as they normally would have. He was also criticized for turning down assistance at times from other agencies and organizations, choosing to handle everything internally. These decisions in the earliest days of the case may have ultimately stymied it, per experts and other officials that have since reviewed the case. Whether or not this is the truth of the matter, what we do know is that investigators with the Springfield Police Department focused heavily on this missing persons case in those early months. But over time, their attention waned. The hands-on involvement of multiple investigators faded, but meanwhile, answers remained elusive. As detectives struggled to allocate time and resources for the frustratingly meandering investigation, their overseers would ultimately decide to suspend the investigation, making it, in essence, a cold case. Part 3. Stephen Garrison and the Galloping Goose. In the first half of 1994, police in Springfield decided to take the Springfield Three investigation back to its roots, returning to their original case notes. Having found no trace of Cheryl Levitt, Susie Streeter, or Stacy McCall in nearly 2 years, investigators went back to the tips and leads they had received over the first 30 days of the women's disappearance. Springfield PD Captain Todd Whitson told reporters at the time, "If you reach a point in an investigation where things slow down, you want to go back and look again." At this point, there were still regular weekly reminders about the case in local newspapers, but the daily coverage had long since faded. Yet the story wasn't nearly forgotten in the minds of Springfield residents, with the missing women's faces still a constant sight for many. Their likenesses were displayed on flyers and billboards erected all across the region, and speculation about who may have been involved in their case was still a hot topic of conversation, although the type of conversation had since changed. Now there was an uneasy sense of tension mixed in, as residents undoubtedly began to worry about whether or not their coworker, their neighbor, or maybe even someone closer to them may have been involved. While Springfield police had once tasked dozens of investigators to work the case in tandem, it had since been relegated to just a single investigator, Doug Thomas, who worked on it full-time. By January 1994, he had been in that same position for more than a year, focusing almost all of his professional time on this single case, ultimately to no avail. Later that year, in August, there was hope that resolution may be close at hand. The case was sent to an impaneled grand jury in Greene County, Missouri, and that grand jury would hear testimony from many of the people involved. not just police and other experts, but from friends and other acquaintances of the victims. This included some of Susie's and Stacy's friends, who had been in their orbit during their final known hours alive. The grand jury also obtained testimony from a couple of names you first heard in the last episode: Susie's ex-boyfriend, Dustin Rekla, and one of his friends, Michael Clay. Both had been arrested following a grave robbing incident in February of 1992, and were suspected of involvement in the missing women's disappearance, having been in Springfield at the time. Another summoned to appear in front of the grand jury was a man named Stephen Garrison. He, along with two others, Ricky West and Michael Rader, were called in to give their own testimony. All three had long criminal records, with the crimes ranging from theft to rape, and were incarcerated at the time but had been free when the Springfield Three had gone missing. Sadly, though, the grand jury disbanded in early 1995 without resolving anything. After 8 months of hearing testimony, no indictments were handed down. Yet, Thomas Holst, a member of that grand jury, later told the Springfield News Leader that many of the things he heard, some of which involved crimes against children, had been enlightening, and not at all in a good way. He later said about the wide-ranging scope of the grand jury, "It would really open a lot of people's eyes. I don't think people realize the sort of things that happen in a community. I'm sure they'd be outraged if they were familiar with the details." At this point, in early 1995, police were already considering suspending the investigation into the Springfield Three. This wouldn't close the case file, but rather would put it into cold case status, meaning that the full-time investigator would get pulled to work on other cases. Police would revisit it should new information, whether it be new leads or tips, surfaced. The decision to suspend the investigation finally came down the pike in March 1995, with Springfield Police Chief Lynn Rowe telling the victims' families that, "We've run out of leads to work. There's just nothing coming in." In the wake of Stacy McCall's disappearance in 1992, her parents had struggled as they tried to navigate the uncertain world that awaits the loved ones of missing people. They learned firsthand how many family members of crime victims often don't know what to do, or in many cases, who to even turn to for help. In 1994, Stuart and Janice McCall established the One Missing Link organization, which aimed to connect grieving families with that very thing. The missing link that families could turn to when looking for their missing loved ones, regardless of age or jurisdiction. Stuart McCall told Greene County police officials at the time, "One thing we found is that missing persons cases are not at the top of the list for law enforcement until 24 or 36 hours later, when you find you have a felony. By then your evidence is gone, your suspects are gone." While this is pretty common sense for many of us that are fully immersed in the world of true crime, this was quite a revelation in the mid-1990s, before shows like Law & Order had displayed the bureaucracy that unfurls in police agencies and prosecutors' offices. This organization also hoped to change the age limits for missing persons organizations, which until then focused almost primarily on finding children, not adults. The McCall's daughter, Stacy, had just recently turned 18 years old at the time of her disappearance, aging her out of such programs. Over time, Janice and Stuart McCall would continue advocating for multiple causes in the area, not just their own daughter's disappearance. They focused primarily on cases involving young women, particularly those in the same demographic as Stacy who had gone missing, but also campaigned against domestic violence, things of that nature, in the hopes of preventing others from becoming victims. They would also appear on pretty much every TV program they were offered, telling the Springfield News Leader in 1995, as they prepared to go on Maury Povich's talk show. "We've done Oprah, Inside Edition, Good Morning America, America's Most Wanted." They knew that doing so would most likely result in disappointment, but per Janice McCall, "There have been letdowns, and it can happen again and again and again, but if there's any chance we might get that right phone call, we've got to take the chance." Amidst their advocacy, the McCalls would speak to various publications about the grief that had stricken them for the past few years. They spoke about how they had been stuck in a weird type of stasis since Stacy's disappearance, something that had irrevocably altered the course of their lives. Janice would tell the Springfield News Leader that same year, 1995, "We exist, but you can't ever go forward. I don't know that even if we found her dead, that I would ever be the way I was. Nothing will ever be the same. There's no way when you take 1,000 days out of someone's life that you can replace those and put them back in. Meanwhile, the family of Susie Streeter and Cheryl Levitt also continued to suffer themselves, having lost both women in one fell swoop. However, most of them lived far outside of the Springfield area, many in the Pacific Northwest, where Cheryl had grown up and Susie had been born. So their family were in a bit of an out-of-sight, out-of-mind scenario. They would still occasionally appear or speak with journalists in the area, but they were less of a regular presence. Debbie Schwartz, Cheryl's sister, told the Springfield News Leader in June 1995, the 3-year mark of the strange disappearance. "It doesn't get a lot easier. When things hit you, they hit you in the gut. It's as intense as it was 3 years ago." Like the Micheal family, these loved ones continued to hold out hope that they would one day see Cheryl and Susie alive again. But as the years passed, that hope became tougher to grasp. More after the break. In September of 1995, one of the primary figures circled as a potential suspect in this case would stand trial. Not for the disappearance of the 3 women from Springfield, mind you, but for a separate crime committed more than a year later. However, the 2 events were directly linked, and to get into that, we'll have to backtrack just a bit. In 1990, 31-year-old Stephen Garrison was serving a 2 to 10-year sentence for burglary, theft, and criminal damage to a property in Kansas. He had been sent to the minimum security Toronto Honor Camp in Greenwood County, Kansas, and was set to be released in May of that year, after serving just a few months. But in April, just 2 weeks away from his release date, Garrison escaped alongside another inmate, Micheal Whelan, and was helped out by his girlfriend, who became his accomplice during the escape. Afterward, Garrison fled to Springfield, where he tried to hide out at his sister's home. When police finally tracked him down, he refused to come out of the home, and a multi-hour standoff ensued, which ultimately ended with Garrison being taken back into police custody without shots being fired. This act of rebellion extended his stay in prison until May 15, 1992, roughly 3 weeks before the disappearance of the Springfield Three. Having been involved with the Galloping Goose motorcycle club beforehand, it's believed that Garrison went right back into his outlaw ways after leaving prison, and lived in the Springfield area. Stephen Garrison wasn't on investigators' radar for the early months of the case, but he would become a primary suspect the next year, 1993, when he put himself on the map, so to speak. In January of 1993, Garrison was arrested for having a gun and narcotics on him, which as a felon meant that he was facing additional charges. While the drug charges were later dropped, the weapons violation meant that he was facing multiple years in prison. With that hanging over his head, he decided to begin talking to police. According to Garrison, he had knowledge about the 3 missing women from Springfield, telling police that he had overheard a friend of his confess to their involvement during a party. Those of you may remember that I mentioned this in the last episode. Garrison was the inmate whose information led police to search a pig farm in rural Webster County, where they discovered evidence that they have yet to unseal in the decades since. While rumors circulate about what this may have been exactly, it is worth noting that the farm itself was owned by the Robb family, who had a familial connection to Garrison. The Robb family patriarch had also been linked to 2 murders from a few years beforehand, which were themselves linked to the drug trade. I know that this is a lot of information, but these shadowy figures in Webster and Greene counties share some unique ties. Some are tied together through family, like Stephen Garrison and the Robb family, while others are more speculative and harder to tie down. Some share involvement in the drug trade, while others are believed to have involvement with the Galloping Goose motorcycle club, but more on them in a bit. Regardless, you just need to know right now that Stephen Garrison was the inmate who led police to this farm, and reportedly told police what had happened to the 3 missing women from Springfield. The search of this farm was followed up by 2 additional searches in the region, during which police reportedly found evidence that they have kept sealed under gag orders for nearly 3 decades. This leads many to believe that this wasn't just a wild goose chase. This was real, and resulted in information that may have not been incriminating for any one person, but was tangible to the point of keeping private after all these years. One investigator, when speaking to reporters at the time, said that the thinking at the time was that Garrison's information could be critical when it came to the disappearance of the 3 missing women, since he reportedly offered up information that had never been disclosed to the public. That information, like the evidence recovered during these 3 searches, is still unknown to the public. So while awaiting trial for his weapons violation, Stephen Garrison's information led authorities to fight for leniency on his behalf. As a result, he had his bond reduced from $10,000 to $2,500, as investigators wanted to keep chatting with him. Ultimately, he was put up at a local hotel so that police could keep gleaning information from him. But during one of these conversations, Garrison did as he had done before. He escaped. He ran away, and the lone detective with him at the time quickly lost him. For nearly 3 weeks, he remained in the wind. Roughly a week and a half later, in August of 1993, a man climbed through the window of a woman's apartment in East Walnut Street in Springfield, near the city center. Using a knife, the man then sexually assaulted the young woman multiple times and stole $552 from her before fleeing, money that her parents had given her to pay rent and utilities. At one point, the man held a knife between the woman's legs while threatening her, giving her specific instructions on how to clean herself off in the shower to rid herself of any evidence. He said that he still might be out there in her apartment when she got out of the shower, so she'd better do as he said. That victim, a 20-year-old student at Missouri State University, described her attacker as a heavily tattooed man with a beer belly that used a knife. Police quickly identified Stephen Garrison as this potential suspect, apprehending him just 9 days later. In September of 1995, Garrison would finally stand trial for the rape and theft of the young woman in Springfield. During his trial, he accused prosecutors of targeting him in exchange for information regarding the Springfield Three, claiming that they were hoping to squeeze him so that he would be incentivized to make a deal. At the time, he told reporters that he had been questioned as a possible suspect in the disappearance, having been released from prison just weeks before they went missing, but he denied any involvement. However, he also denied involvement in the rape case he had been accused of, which showed him for the liar that he was. During the trial, Garrison and his attorney alleged that the victim, a 20-year-old college student that did not know him, willingly let him inside her apartment at 3 o'clock in the morning, had sex with him multiple times, and then gave him the $552. A claim the prosecution rightfully condemned as sounding illogical and irrational, which it was. Stephen Garrison was ultimately convicted of the charges filed against him: forcible rape with a weapon, forcible sodomy with a weapon, first-degree robbery, and first-degree burglary. The jury took just 90 minutes to convict him based on the evidence presented in court, and that time included the picking of the jury foreman and a lunch break. He was later sentenced to 3 30-year prison terms, which were set to run concurrently. He was also ordered to spend another 10 years in prison for the break-in, which would be served consecutively, bringing his total time in prison up to 40 years. Stephen Garrison is still in prison to this day, although the end of his sentence is quickly approaching. As of this episode's recording, his involvement remains a matter of uncertain speculation, with most of the information he provided to police remaining sealed under gag order by the Greene County courts. For that reason, it's hard to ascertain whether he provided them with anything truly incriminating, but based on what it led to, multiple searches in the region, which resulted in evidence also being sealed under the gag order, it's hard to believe that it's nothing. And based off of the early insistence by police that he had given them information not known to the general public, it's believed by many that Stephen Garrison does indeed know something. Although what that something is, no one really seems to know for sure. Some online commenters have corresponded with Garrison in prison, and posted the contents of their messages online via various websites and social media sites. Some have appeared on web sleuths, some on Reddit, others still on Facebook groups dedicated to the Springfield Three case. There's a lot of these messages out there, and the information is almost impossible to verify, so I don't quite want to dive into the specifics. After all, the last thing I want to do is get sued over publishing unverified online comments from sketchy sources. But if you look up Stephen Garrison on any of these sites or in these Facebook groups, you'll find that a lot of people find him and his information to be incredibly suspicious. Some believe him to have had direct involvement in the disappearance of the Springfield Three, while others feel inclined to take him at his word. that he is merely the purveyor of this information that he stumbled upon. It remains likely that Stephen Garrison knows something about this case, as his information led to one of the most promising developments in it. But considering that happened 3 entire decades ago, it's hard to say what exactly his involvement may have been. During Stephen Garrison's trial, it would come to light that his court-appointed attorney, Dean Price, had received death threats at the very onset of the trial by persons unknown. It has been theorized by some that these threats may have come from an organization known as the Galloping Goose MC, a 1% outlaw motorcycle club that has been involved in multiple criminal enterprises over the years. This includes, but is not limited to, the meth trade throughout the Midwest, in particular throughout Missouri. Despite their innocuous-sounding name, the Galloping Goose MC had grown in notoriety throughout the 1980s and early 1990s, with the area around Springfield becoming a hotbed for their activity at the time this story unfolds, becoming friendly with other MCs like the Hells Angels. In case you're unfamiliar with MCs, the 1% patch that many of the Galloping Goose and Hells Angels members wear comes from a statement made by the American Motorcycle Association decades ago, that 99% of motorcyclists are law-abiding citizens, the implicit understanding being that the remaining 1% are not. Rather, they seem to embrace their identity as outlaws, which sounds cool in theory, but usually just means that the person involved likes to use and/or deal in meth, which is objectively not cool. Hot take, I know. For the record, I know that there are many good people involved in clubs, so I'm not trying to paint all of them with a broad brush. After all, the statement that 99% of motorcyclists are good people, that's pretty true from what I found. But the Galloping Goose are definitely part of the 1%, and over the decades, they have become one of the biggest clubs operating in the state of Missouri. Some theorize that they, or at least some of their members, may have been involved in the disappearance of the 3 women from Springfield in 1992, a time of rapid expansion for this MC. The Galloping Goose had several members involved in the early days of the investigation, including Stephen Garrison, who you've learned about in this episode. Garrison's own involvement put him on investigators' radar, and he purportedly offered up information to police that was not known to the public at that time. But this potential Galloping Goose connection is not limited to just him. The young men that I mentioned in the last episode, Dustin Reckla, Michael Clay, and Joseph Rydell, also had direct connections to the Galloping Goose. If you recall, the 3 had gotten in trouble for disturbing a pair of graves in February 1992, and Susie, having been romantically involved with Dustin Reckla at the time, later gave police testimony against him. It is believed that Cheryl Levitt, Susie's mom, was also set to give testimony against the trio, claiming that they had driven her vehicle the day of the grave robbing incident. Is it possible that, fearing this testimony, the 3 had acted against Cheryl and potentially Susie as well, with Stacy proving to be an unexpected witness to the crime that also happened to be disappeared? As I briefly touched on in the last episode, this doesn't seem like the most outlandish idea, especially considering the possible drug angle. Even if we factor in the light sentences all 3 eventually got, which basically amounted to probation with extra steps, they were facing felonies at the time. Would their possible connection to dealers with the Galloping Goose and the usage of drugs, likely meth, have impacted their thinking in any way, possibly clouding their thoughts and making them more impulsive and/or rash? Would the Galloping Goose MC, possibly worried about a few young dipshits being squeezed by police and forced to talk about their own drug dealing, have taken matters into their own hands and tried to disappear a potential witness or 2? Or could they have maybe encouraged the other 3 to take action against a potential witness? We'll touch some more on the Galloping Goose later in the series, but they would have some strange connections to even more individuals linked to this case. And that is on the next episode of Unresolved.
Just days before the 5th anniversary of her daughter's disappearance, Janice Micheal helped supervise a placement of a memorial bench at the victim's garden in Phelps Grove Park. Relatives and friends of Stacy Micheal, Susie Streeter, and Cheryl Levitt will officially dedicate the monument on Saturday. Micheal says a black granite marker with the women's birth dates and the date of their disappearance will provide closure for some and healing for all who knew and loved them.
I hope that one day soon that we'll still have, an ending, that we'll be able to solve this and we'll be able to have either 3 women back or put them to rest. Until then, this is a temporary place to at least talk and think and reflect.
June 6, 1992, Stacy Micheal and Susie Streeter graduated from Kickapoo High School. After celebrating, the girls went to Streeter's home, but sometime overnight vanished along with Streeter's mother, Cheryl Levitt. Since the women's disappearance, Springfield police have received nearly 5,000 leads in the case and still average about 9 a month. Still, police have yet to name a prime suspect, and 5 years after the fact appear to be no closer to solving the mystery.
As an open investigation, during the last 5 years, we've looked at many people to actually classify them as a suspect or not as a suspect. I guess that's a matter of semantics.
They're working hard on it, and I appreciate it.
Like Micheal, Cliff Williams, Levitt's uncle, still remains in close contact with investigators. Williams checks with police about once a month for new developments in the case and says the not knowing is still the hardest part.
The not knowing is, that's the thing that'll keep you awake at night.
I still catch myself wondering what she has on, what she looks like. Has she changed? Is she safe?
For now, Micheal says she at least knows there's an angel watching over the 3 missing women and the families of so many more victims. In Springfield, Melissa
Colorado News. Thanks for listening, everyone. This episode was researched, written, hosted, and produced by myself, Micheal Whelan. If you would like to learn more about this story, make sure to check out the Unresolved website. I post the transcripts for each episode there, and in addition to that, you can find links to my sources, additional information, links to the podcast's social media pages, the store, and so much more. That website is unresolved.me. Once again, that's unresolved.me. If you would like to support this show, which is a fully independent production, you can do so by hovering over the support tab at the top of the website. There you can find links to not only the podcast store, but the PayPal link, where you can make a one-time donation. You could also find the link to the Unresolved Patreon there, where you can become a monthly supporter and gain access to exclusive digital content. You can find that by clicking at the link on the top of the website or by heading directly to patreon.com/unresolvedpod. Before we go, I would like to thank the podcast producers who support this show each month through Patreon. These amazing people are Roberta Jansen, Sarah Moscaritolo, Ben Crocum, Scott Meesey, Marion Welsh, Jacinda Klass, Lauren Nicole, James Weiss, Astrid Nair, Alex Kalaragopoulos, Annie Broad, Crystal J, Stephen Diaz, Heather Fiddler, Anna T, Cece, Marcus Mitchell, and Tabitha Colvin. Thank you all so very much. Your support really does mean the world to me. If you would like to become a producer, you can do so once more at patreon.com/unresolvedpod. Your help ensures that this remains an independent production, and I can continue to spend my time diving deep into newspaper archives and online rabbit holes to explore strange mysteries like this one. I'll be back with another episode next week, and we'll continue to explore some of the suspects and theories linked to this case. As you can already tell, we've blown past my original expectations for this story, which started out as a single episode and is now possibly a 5-ish part series. I guess we'll see how things turn out. Join us again next week to find out. Until then, please take care.